Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I am your host, Robin, and I'm thrilled to be speaking with you today on behalf of Back to Your Roots Herbs. We have a topic today that touches the lives of so many men and the families who love them. We are going to be talking about a specific Amazonian tree bark and its profound relationship with prostate health, specifically prostate cancer. Now, I know that is a heavy word. For many men receiving a diagnosis, or even just seeing those PSA numbers creep up during an annual checkup, brings a very specific kind of fear. There's the fear of the disease itself, of course, but then there is the fear of the treatment. We are used to thinking that to kill cancer, we have to use harsh, scorched earth tactics that leave the rest of the body weak and depleted. But what if that wasn't the only way? What if nature provided a mechanism that was smart enough to distinguish between a healthy cell that needs to be protected and a dangerous cell that needs to be stopped? Today, we are going to explore the science behind Pao Pereira, also known by its botanical name, Gysospermum veloci. This isn't just folklore or wishful thinking. We are going to look at hard data from laboratory studies, clinical trials conducted at major institutions like Columbia University, and even historical case studies involving world leaders. We're going to see how this plant extract works to block cancer cell division, induce programmed cell death, and perhaps most importantly, how it does all of this while leaving healthy tissue unharmed. Let's start with the plant itself. Pao Pereira is a tree indigenous to the Amazon rainforest. For generations, it was used in traditional South American medicine for things like malaria and digestive issues. But in the 20th century, a brilliant researcher named Dr. Mirko Beljanski at the Pasteur Institute began to look at it through a different lens. He wasn't just looking for something that killed cells, he was looking for something that targeted the very structure of cancer DNA. This brings us to a fascinating concept called DNA destabilization. Imagine for a moment the DNA in your healthy cells. It is tightly wound, compact, and stable. It is held together by strong bonds. This stability is what keeps your genetic code safe. But Dr. Beljanski hypothesized that cancer cells are different. Because of environmental toxins, chronic inflammation, or carcinogens, the DNA in cancer cells becomes loose. It relaxes. The strands separate slightly. This is called destabilization. This loose structure is what allows the cancer cell to replicate so quickly and erratically. It is like a zipper that has come undone. Here is where Pao Pereira comes in. The extract is rich in specific alkaloids, particularly one called flavopererine. These alkaloids have a unique shape that fits perfectly into those loose, destabilized sections of cancer DNA. When they slide into those gaps, they essentially lock the zipper. They block the machinery that the cancer cell uses to copy its DNA. If the cell cannot copy its DNA, it cannot divide. It stops growing. But here is the beautiful part. Because the DNA in your healthy cells is tightly wound and stable, there are no gaps for these alkaloids to slip into. They just bounce off. This is the secret to the safety profile of Pao Pereira. It ignores healthy cells completely. This isn't just theory. In toxicology screenings, healthy fibroblasts and bone marrow cells, which are usually the first to suffer during chemotherapy, remained completely unaffected by concentrations of the extract that were lethal to cancer cells. Now, I want to move from the microscope to the real world because the story of this extract has touched the highest levels of power. Some of you may remember François Mitterrand, the former president of France. In 1981, shortly after he was elected, Mitterrand was diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer. It had already spread to his bones. At that time, the prognosis for that stage of disease was grim, usually anywhere from 3 months to 3 years. Mitterrand had a country to run. He could not afford the cognitive fog and physical frailty that would come with the heavy-handed hormonal and radiation therapies of that era. He chose a different path. He began a regimen that included Dr. Beljanski's extract, specifically Pao Pereira, and another botanical called Rauwolfia vomitoria. The results were frankly defying the odds. Mitterrand didn't just survive, he continued to serve 2 full presidential terms. He lived for 14 years after that diagnosis, finally passing away in 1996. That is more than 10 years beyond his initial prognosis. According to his doctor, the extract stabilized the disease progression and managed his symptoms, allowing him to remain functional and active. It is a powerful example of what is possible when we support the body's ability to regulate itself. But we don't just rely on anecdotes, even famous ones. We need rigorous science. This brings us to a phase 1-2 clinical trial conducted by Dr. Aaron Katz at Columbia University Medical Center. This study is incredibly important because it addressed a group of men who are often left in limbo. These were men with elevated PSA levels averaging between 8 and 10, but who had negative biopsies. They didn't have a tumor mass that could be surgically removed, yet they had biochemical signs of trouble. This is often called watchful waiting, which can feel more like anxious waiting. In this trial, 42 men took a combination of Pauperera and Rauwolfia daily for 12 months. The findings were encouraging. The study documented a significant reduction in PSA levels in the treated group, indicating a reduction in inflammation or cellular proliferation. But beyond the numbers, the men felt better. They reported improvements in urinary symptoms, things like weak stream, or having to wake up multiple times at night. Perhaps most strikingly, very few patients in the cohort progressed to detectable prostate cancer during the study. It suggested that the extract might be stabilizing precancerous lesions, preventing them from making that leap to malignancy. And crucially, there were no reported adverse events. No toxicity. This contrasts sharply with pharmaceutical preventative options like finasteride, which can often come with side effects regarding sexual function. So how exactly is it doing this? We talked about the DNA locking mechanism, but the research shows Pauperera works through a network effect. It doesn't just do one thing. One of its most powerful actions is inhibiting something called NFKB. Think of NFKB as a survival switch inside the cell. In prostate cancer, this switch is stuck in the on position, constantly telling the cell to survive inflammation and resist dying. It is often why cancer becomes resistant to chemotherapy. Pauperera reaches into the cell and turns that switch off. It prevents NFKB from entering the nucleus of the cell. Without that signal, the cancer cell loses its protection. It becomes vulnerable again. This leads to the next mechanism, which is apoptosis, or programmed cell death. Our bodies have a natural way of clearing out damaged cells. It is a form of cellular suicide, but cancer cells are clever. They produce proteins that block this process, effectively making themselves immortal. Pauperera reverses this. In laboratory studies on prostate cancer cells, specifically the aggressive PC3 line, the extract was shown to downregulate the anti-death proteins like BCL2 and upregulate the pro-death proteins like BAX. It tips the scales, it triggers the executioner enzymes in the cell, causing it to dismantle itself peacefully without causing necrosis or inflammation in the surrounding tissue. This was confirmed in studies where they observed the cleavage of an enzyme called PARP, which is the final irreversible step of apoptosis. I want to touch on something very specific regarding hormones because prostate cancer is often driven by hormones. We found that Pauperera acts as a natural inhibitor of 5-alpha reductase. This is the enzyme that converts testosterone into DHT, which is the potent fuel for prostate issues, including BPH and cancer. By inhibiting this enzyme, Pauperera helps reduce the hormonal drive on the prostate. But unlike synthetic inhibitors that can tank a man's libido or sperm count, studies have shown Pauperera does not have these detrimental effects on sperm count or morphology. It offers hormonal regulation without the reproductive toxicity. Now, we have to talk about dosage because this is where natural medicine requires just as much precision as pharmaceutical medicine. There is a tendency to think that if something is good, more is better. The research on Pauperera shows us that this is not true. In animal xenograft studies, researchers found a U-shaped dose-response curve. When they treated mice with 10 to 20 milligrams per kilogram, they saw a massive reduction in tumor volume, around 75 to 80% smaller than controls. That is a huge success. But when they increased the dose to 50 milligrams per kilogram, the effectiveness actually dropped off. The tumors grew similarly to the untreated group. Why? The researchers hypothesized that at such high doses, the alkaloids might aggregate in the gut-reducing absorption, or perhaps the body triggers metabolic enzymes to flush it out too fast. The takeaway here is vital. Megadosing can be counterproductive. Adherence to the tested moderate dosages is paramount to retaining the anti-cancer benefit. It is about finding that sweet spot where the biology responds best. Let's look at the aggressive forms of the disease. Prostate cancer lethality is almost exclusively due to metastasis, when it spreads to the bone or liver. To do this, cancer cells have to chew through the tissue barriers using enzymes called MMPs. Pauperera has been shown to inhibit MMP9, essentially taking away the scissors the cancer uses to cut through tissue. In scratch wound assays, where scientists create a gap in a layer of cells, untreated cancer cells will rapidly migrate to close the gap. But cells treated with Pau Pereira, they stay put. They fail to migrate. This suggests a potential for limiting the shedding of circulating tumor cells, which is a critical factor in preventing metastasis. We also mentioned synergy earlier. Integrative oncology is rarely about using just one tool. The combination of Pau Pereira with Rauwolfia vomitoria is the classic protocol, but there is also evidence suggesting it can work alongside conventional treatments. Resistance to taxane chemotherapy like docetaxel is a primary cause of treatment failure in advanced prostate cancer. Because Pau Pereira inhibits that NFKB survival switch, it theoretically reverses the mechanism of resistance. In studies on other cancers like ovarian and pancreatic, Pau Pereira was shown to sensitize tumors to chemotherapy, allowing for effective treatment at lower doses. While we need more specific human trials on this co-treatment for prostate cancer, the mechanistic logic is sound. It lowers the apoptotic threshold, making the chemotherapy more effective. So where does this leave us? If you are looking at the landscape of prostate health, whether you are dealing with BPH, a rising PSA, or a diagnosis, Pau Pereira represents a scientifically validated option that addresses the biological complexity of the condition. It attacks the inflammation. It halts the proliferation. It induces cell death in malignant cells. And it does so with a safety margin that is rare in oncology. It offers a way to be proactive to intervene at the cellular level without declaring war on the rest of your body. It is amazing to think that the bark of a tree from the Amazon could hold such a specific key to a problem that affects millions of men in the modern world. But perhaps that is just nature doing what it has always done, providing solutions if we are willing to look for them and understand them. I hope this discussion has shed some light on the options available to you. Knowledge is your best defense and your best tool. Thank you so much for listening. To learn more, please visit us at backtoyourrootsherbs.com. The direct link for information on Pau Pereira versus prostate cancer is in the description below. Until next time, take care of yourselves.